Dean, I like the way you have a number in that column. Can I put in 3 for my number?
3?
Sure, I want 3 votes.
Oh, well,
You can say no.
no, I can't.
All right, Dean, are you getting any lunch in this marathon?
Not yet, and my breakfast was a little meager. I see Kent was sensible. He ran to get something before we started.
I did too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think MRBAU Matter must be Lindsay. And I see Beth. And I see Hilaire. And I see Dan. And I see Mel. So yes, we have 7 reps and 2 alternates. So we are doing great. We may have others, Julie, Bridget. Yeah, so I'm going to stop sharing that.
All right. So as per usual, we'll kick the meeting off with a round of introductions, get faces on screen. I'm Lindsay, I'm the chair. She, her pronouns, voting member with the MRBA. And I'll call on people to expedite the process. Dean.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dean Pierce, member of staff. He, him pronouns.
Dan.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Dan. I'm a voting member from Richford.
Kent.
Kent Henderson, board chair of the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain, and I'm a voting member.
Dave.
Dave Allerton, Public Works Director in Town of St. Albans. I'm an alternate.
Hilaire.
Hi, I'm Hilaire Diamond, ecologist at Vermont Land Trust, and I am a voting member.
Beth.
Beth Torpy, I'm the water quality planner for NVDA, and I'm a voting member.
Bridget.
Hi, I'm Bridget Butler, Executive Director for Friends of Northern Lake Champlain. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an alternate.
Barry.
Barry Lamke, he, him, Northwest Regional Planning Commission, voting member.
Ellen.
I'm Ellen Fox with the MRBA, alternate she, her pronouns.
Ted.
Hi, Ted Siddell, Orleans County NRCD, voting member, he, him.
Julie.
Hi, my name is Julie Medina. I'm the Stormwater Coordinator.
Jim. Mel.
Hi, I'm Mel. I'm with the Franklin County NRCD. She, her pronouns. I'm an alternate for Lauren Weston.
Oh, and we've got Sarah. We are doing intros, if you don't mind introing yourself real quick. Sarah Downs. Maybe she's just getting hooked up. Sarah Downs, can you hear us? Well, Maybe I'll throw in the chat and just make sure. Sarah Downs, can you hear us? Because Sarah is a voting member from the town of Enosburg. Oh, there. Coming off mute.
Yes, I could not get my stuff to work. Now I'm on.
All right. So we're just doing quick intros. If you want to just say who you are and who you're repping, that'd be great.
Sarah Downs, voting member from Enosburg.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for doing that. It's always good to see everybody. Our meeting protocols, obviously it's lunchtime, so understand if you're turning your screen off, but do try to be engaged. If you have questions or comments, you can either put them in the chat, you can raise your hand, or you can come off mute. We'll try to keep things fairly informal, but moving forward. And yeah. I will try to keep track of the chat and read through anything that's said so that it gets recorded. Any questions about that? Seeing none, we'll move on to conflict of interest declarations, if anyone has any. We're not voting on any projects this meeting, so probably unlikely, but always good to put it in there. And similarly, any adjustments or changes to the agenda as Dean sent it out? Seeing none. We will seek approval of the minutes from our last meeting. Everybody hopefully got a chance to read through the packet that Dean sent out, the good notes from our February 7th meeting. And if anyone wants to make any adjustments or note any errors or make a motion to approve them as written, this would be a great time.
I make a motion to approve.
That's a
I'll
motion from
second it.
Ted. I think that was Dan seconding. So all in favor, let me just make it so I can see everybody. Please indicate. I will read off by
Oh, Barry has his hand up.
Is that just, are you approving Barry or? Yeah, so voting to approve the minutes as written. Lindsay, Dan, Barry, Ted, Alaire, Kent, Beth, Sarah. All right. Minutes from the February meeting are accepted as written. And let me scroll back up to the agenda. Now it's time for public comment. Anyone have public comment not related to any agenda items?
I do. I'm curious, for those that have been putting out projects, what's the process for quarterly reporting? Is that tied to the invoicing, or is there another mechanism? We have this question is coming up in the Mem for Magog, and we're trying to streamline where a couple of Quiz sponsors are getting, juggling 8 to 10 quiz projects, and the reporting is becoming, if it's like these absolute needed quarterly reports, why can't it be done on the invoicing where there's enough detail to satisfy? And this might be a question for Dean.
Oh, Dean, you're on mute.
Fine. Sorry about that. We want it to be low key, and we have relatively recently created an invoice form. We initially thought we were not going to tell everybody here, you got to use our invoice form and you've got to use our reporting form. But some of the feedback that I've received has led me to change my mind, and that is that some people find an invoicing form to be helpful. So we would be perfectly happy if, as part of the invoice, you attach a bullet list type report.
Oh, okay.
We're not looking for something. And I believe our contracts with partners in the master agreements, we say something like monthly invoices is the default, but others by, agreement, mutual agreement, and quarterly seems fine. And we're not even necessarily going to be hard about that, but I do want to have check-ins with recipients so that I have some understanding of how things are going. We think this will get more formalized as time goes by, but you can attach your report to your invoice. We don't have a problem with that. And then the last thing I'll say quickly is that we will probably be doing an email blast in early June, to just make people aware of the fact that we're approaching the end of our fiscal year, and it would be helpful to have things invoiced so that we can put them in the proper fiscal year and help with our auditing and all of that.
Certainly. Okay. Yeah, that was the question came up from some of our WIC members in the Memphremagog of that, how do we streamline some of that reporting? And it seems to be that a lot of us have already used the invoicing as a way to, with other grant funders, as a way to get that at those quarterly reports.
Yeah,
And we do it monthly as invoices come in.
Yeah, and we may actually at some point get it in the position where I would send a link and people can do the reports in an online form. It could also be something where there's an element of tracking progress in that. We're not there yet, but that is something that we see ourselves moving towards, before. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to be very considerate of sponsors that have a lot of grants out there. Because it's taking, from what I can tell from our partners, that it's going to eat into a lot of time juggling, 8 or 10 QuIS grants. And they want to streamline the process as best as possible.
Great.
Anyways, thank you for that. That's helpful.
Thanks for bringing that up, Ted. It's always good to hear reps from other WICs and the concerns that are coming up. Any other comments not related to agenda items or questions? Next item is seating of any new reps or alternates. I don't believe we have any, but I want to mention it in case I missed something. We've been a pretty cohesive group for a while now. And then last meeting recently, we decided to put a standing agenda item for budget adjustment requests. So if there are any budget adjustment requests, now would be the time to make those.
Yeah, we at this time there are no budget adjustment requests. I guess that's the simplest. That's the simplest thing, and it will be a standing agenda item for anybody that didn't get that news earlier. There was, just by way of illustration of it, at the Lamoille WIC meeting, which was held earlier, they had their first instance where there was a report of a request, And their meeting materials included a memo that summarized, who made the request, how much it was for, and documented the decision by staff. And in that case, it was requiring the chair and vice chair, or two members of the council in addition to staff. And the request had been made by the chair, so we had to find a second member who was not the vice chair. And so the WIC members received in their packets this memo, the documentation of the decision, documentation of the request, the size, the percentage, how it changed the cost effectiveness ratio, and it's informational. So because at the point that it's approved by staff and the chair and the vice chair, we move forward with whatever needs to happen next, and that's usually developing an amendment to a task order. And the whole point of this is so that we don't lose time. But it's on the agenda to be transparent about decision making. And even though the action has been taken, if there is something about the process that seems to people to be broken or to be breaking, then that could always lead to revisiting the policy and making changes to it. So that's part of the reason for doing this, is it's just what's happening, how's it going, and would it ever drive further changes to the policy? So that's, a little bit more context.
Great, thanks, Dan. Gonna leave you in the seat for the next agenda item 2, brainstorming session.
Yeah, and I will observe that this is a less meaty agenda than some, for a reason or two, and I'm hopeful that something that was an experiment is going to actually work this time. But in both basins, we are facing an opportunity on Friday because of the Clean Water Network Summit that's happening. As part of the agenda for that, there is a time for each basin and QUISP to take part in what's called a slam, basically a chance to tell others in Vermont how things are going. It doesn't have to be in rhyme, although I have toyed with the idea of trying to take whatever it is that we say and put it in rhyme. But it struck me that in addition to the dry facts about number of projects, dollars, tentative cost effectiveness, that it would be useful perhaps to say some things about the process and development of projects, and what is working and what's not. So it seemed like having a brainstorming session where the people on this basin council could identify things could be helpful, because we could address it. Now, there is a problem solving panel in the afternoon, which it will be interesting to hear, but we weren't asked to be on that panel. We're the only basin, or the only QUISP that has 2 basins, and we thought maybe that would make sense. But we saw sharing some of our ideas about how we might improve the project process as a good way to use some of our 7 minutes. It's technically 7 minutes for each basin. So, and that is also supposed to include whatever time we leave for questions. But anyway, floated the idea with the chair and the vice chair, and they agreed that we could put it on this agenda. And I hope it doesn't seem too loosey-goosey, but in the memo, I'd say this could be a very informal exercise, but it could also be more structured. And the way that I was thinking that we might make it more structured is through using a whiteboard. And so that's what I may be successful in pulling up. And if people can give me just 1 second more than a second. Bear with me. Okay, so I'm hopeful that people see a bunch of colored boxes on the screen. Do you see them?
It's loading
Okay.
slowly. Yeah, I'm seeing them.
Okay, so what I'm proposing for the group to consider, and this is again an agenda where we have some time. What I'm proposing is that we have a discussion that reflects our thoughts on the project development process, and we talk about or identify what things could be kept about that process, what things should be added, what should we do more of, what should we do less of. And the idea is that after we've gone through those steps, we could perhaps propose a series of actions. So what sometimes happens in exercises like this, it's a small enough group where people, I'm hoping someone can just double click one of the purple or any colored boxes, and you should be able to see that I just typed hello world. Lindsay, can you double click one of the keeps just to confirm that you are able to do that? Because if this doesn't work, I'm going to have to do a plan B where I will hear what people say and I will fill out the boxes. Are people, it told me that you could edit.
Yeah, where I can see it's all in there, but I'm not able to.
I can't really read anything. Everything's so small.
Okay, well, here, I'm going to
I
solve that.
zoomed in, Beth. I
Okay.
used the zoom button, but I am not able to edit.
Okay. Okay. Well, if it's okay, if we want to have a discussion, I mean, first of all, let's just confirm that people think it would be worthwhile having a discussion about the project development process, what's working, and it's ultimately leading to, you know, things that we would recommend be changed or actions taken. If we think that that's worthwhile and it could help inform the comments made, then is this okay to do it? Now, with the Lamoille Basin, we just decided, in light of time, limited time, people would just send me an email, and that email could say, I think we should keep this about the process. And I think that we should add that, or I think we need more of this, and it could be more money or more technical staff so we don't have to wait or whatever, and we need less of something else. And then I would compile them and we could come back, and that clearly wouldn't be something that is going to work well. It's unlikely that it would all be assembled by Friday in time for presentation, but who knows if people, but if having this discussion is worthwhile, I can fill the little colored boxes out, and people will be able to see what we're discussing in the same way of taking notes and sharing them on a screen would be. But let's just first confirm that people think, yeah, you know, we've been at this for over 2 years, and we've done a lot of things, and we've got projects in the pipeline, but I wish we had more projects in the pipeline or whatever. I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but does this seem like it would be a useful exercise for folks just before we dove into it? Or would it be just better to have it as a facilitated conversation? And since this is being recorded, I don't have to, you know, share a tool like this. We can instead just really have a facilitated conversation, and the recording will keep track of it and we'll work it up into the minutes. What do people think? I see Ken's hand.
Yeah, And Dean, you've been nice enough to explain it to me twice, and I'm still not really clear on who my audience is. Because I think that we have worked really well as a group, and we've talked about things that need to be added and subtracted for almost 2 years now. And I think we're addressing these things. So are you saying that you want more feedback for Northwest, or are we making comments to DEC and the entire QUIS, administration? I'm just not real clear who I'm talking to.
Yeah, sorry, that's a really important question, and I'm glad you asked it. And perhaps it's because of the timing of the summit that I have seen the audience to be DEC and to some extent also the other basins, other QUISP, the other regions, because I have been attending a lot of DEC organized check-in meetings over the months and years, and I've also been in the QUISP folks themselves have meetings, and we hear common themes, but we don't always organize what our perspectives are. So I'm not thinking about us internally so much as I am thinking externally, meaning DEC and perhaps the other regions that might benefit from the perspective that we have, and if they were to do something similar, we might benefit as well if they shared. But we don't have, from our perspective as a QUISP, we don't have a system that's quite what we thought it would be when we started. And so it's, I think, partly out of frustration that it has been more difficult to get projects in line and advance them than we foresaw when we were first getting into this game. And I don't mean to go on too much because I'm getting tired of my own voice, but I think that it's as far as internal influence, I think I was deliberate in having this agenda item before the next one, where I'm just going to talk a bit about the upcoming call for applications, because if there's something about emphasizing certain types of projects or encouraging certain types of applications that we should be doing, then we have a little bit of time. We don't have a lot, but we have a little bit of time to tweak the call for applications so we do it. We don't want to change it drastically, but for example, there have been some comments made by DEC staff that the Missisquoi Basin should invest, basically that we're sitting on a lot of funding and we could be spending more funding in encouraging the development of projects. And some of our perspective is that the pipeline it's a difficult pipeline to move through. So it's a little bit concerning to spend a lot of money at the front end of a very constrained pipeline. We'd rather see the pipeline open up and then sink more money into the early end of it than we would like to sink a lot of money in while the pipeline is still constrained. But we might affect that early end of the pipeline a little bit if our call for applications specifically said, okay, the emphasis on this round of applications is assessments. And I have some facts and figures I can show a little bit later, but we have not funded a project like a stormwater master plan. And a stormwater master plan is a type of project that is an assessment, and it identifies a bunch of other projects. Now we've funded some things that are sort of like that, which is good, but we have not funded anything that is per se called an assessment project. And is that a good idea? Do we need to do that or not? Or do we need to figure out a way that we can effectively help cover some of the basic costs? But that isn't necessarily easy. We understand that partner organizations don't have a lot of resources and they have constrained capacity. And we know DEC has been talking about providing some funds for the capacity. And many of you know, if not all of you know, that WUV, Watershed United Vermont, has just opened up this first round of funding of the so-called capacity grants. But with the number of applicants expected and the amount of funding available, it's not going to make a huge difference. So should the QUISP be looking at some way, somehow, within the rules that DEC has set up to provide an additional amount of funding that could be tied to the capacity funds that an organization might get from WUF? Anyway, I'm droning on here. I see Ted has his hand up, and maybe
Yeah. You started speaking to some of the issues that we see, and one is capacity across a really large watershed, really large basin. And what would be nice thinking forward is like maybe a pool of like some kind of assessments that gets our foot in the door for project development. And for Orleans, you know, that's the upper Missisquoi. And right now, the one project I'm looking at going into design and implementation has such a low p-value that it's not even worth throwing in front of you all to consider at this point. It's more of a wetland project. But that leads into another fact is like, could we start lumping projects that have some kind of design from another assessment and move right into 100% design and implementation? So bundling types of grants up together into a more palatable package that could be, so you're not spending a lot of time writing, I need a 30% design, then it gets to 100% design and writing another for implementation. Could we lump some of that together if the right situation arises? And tree plantings can fall into that. Same with some of those process-based restoration projects where it's not heavily engineered.
Yeah, maybe a quick response before Alaire. The skipping of steps is really, it's a function of the funding policy. So whether or not you can have an expedited process is really a function of the funding policy. So I don't know if it's going to I don't know if it's going to be possible to combine different project types with different numbers of steps. So,
well, not different projects, but say you got a project that you already have a 30% design built, you get DEC out there and they're saying, yes, this would be a great project. We just need to check in at 100% design and move forward. Could we put those together into one funding package?
Yeah, I mean, some of this is
and it would be your deliverables. That would be like, okay, now we're at 100. Boom. Now we can go to implementation.
Yeah, I think some of, getting back to Kent's earlier question about audience, some of this I think is these are ideas that need to be heard by DEC so that they can create whatever policies that they need to create so things can happen. What my experience of the last couple of months shows is that DEC is willing to bend rules or be flexible, show flexibility.
Well,
but
They
not
should.
always. But not always. And when it's an improvised situation, it's hard to open up like a funding round that is for, projects that might combine steps unless we know that yes, in fact, DEC will do it. But I guess the good news is that I saw a recent project that was a stream wood addition project where DEC let something that the BWIC approved as preliminary design, and the next step, the next number that they gave was for implementation. When before that, it was gonna have to go through a final design. So if they clarify their policies and they say multiple steps can happen, it's just that I don't think we can bank on that. I think that it's going to depend on DEC
It'll
saying.
be situationally dependent. It's not going to be for everything. Say a floodplain restoration where you have multiple components to a project, that's going to require a lot more funding for design elements and then into implementation, because there may be things that come off of that design. But I'm thinking of really basic, smaller projects that have a lot of bang for their buck that can expedite from, instead of drawing things out a year, let's get them done within a year.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that from the perspective of the QUISP, if they're, I heard you say, there is this administrative overhead, and we want to keep that as limited as possible. So if there is a clear path where you could submit, or someone could submit an application for 5 different stream planting sites, and it's going to get a number, because as anybody who was part of the last meeting heard me say, we act on the project watershed ID number. And if there's a watershed ID number that says the work that you want to do is viable, then we will process an application for it. So if they will allow it, then we will process it. I don't see any reason why we would be insisting that you break up a project into multiple projects. And so if they will allow you to combine them and give it a single number, then I'm willing to act on that as a QUISP if we can.
Cool. Yeah, this is something that I think DC is hearing this from through different avenues. Like as we stand out there on the field with folks from DC, we can bring up these questions to them, and in some cases, it flies. And I'm just wanting to make sure, because that we're synchronized across basins. This idea.
Yeah, the only thing that I will add to that is that the world is simpler when you have, if you have a world where you have one project ID number and you have multiple sites, the world is simpler if all of those sites are on the same property. Because as these projects that we are funding have a maintenance angle and a landowner approval angle. And if you have a project with multiple sites and you have multiple landowners, the world gets very sticky if you have to, if you need to collect approvals from multiple property owners and it's tied into one project. If somebody holds up, it could make it really challenging. And so I think we would probably prefer, I think we would want to see as much as possible, if there are multiple projects, they're on the same property. When you tie the projects together under one ID, because we do the reporting based on the projects, and it'll get really complicated if the pace of development was much slower with the landowner activities.
Yeah, good discussion, Dean. I mean, this is what you're looking for. You're muted.
Yes, I am, and I see a Alair's hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, for what it's worth, I agree with Ted 100% about that. The need to like apply for different stages of a project can sometimes just unreasonably feel like it drags something out. I have a project in a different district that's a berm removal. It's like an incredibly basic thing, like moving sand out of the way. And I'm going through the QUISP, and it's great to get the funding through that, but doing preliminary design and then doing final design and then doing implementation, like this thing just needs to be moved. We could call up an excavator and get them out there tomorrow, but now we're like probably looking at a year and a half or something. It probably won't be able to happen this year. That just seems like that's not what we want. It's a huge waste of energy and money too. So I'm not sure. There's different issues there, but I think one of them is definitely the like need to apply for different stages at different, separate them out in a way that's just breaks it up. And I like the idea, Ted, of just like having a check-in and making sure that the plans are, that DEC approves the plans and then you can move forward. That kind of thing, I think would be really great. So I just, for whatever it's worth, Dean, you're hearing this from a couple of us who are doing projects, like to pass that on in that form. I mean, the other piece that I have is just like, there is a capacity issue. And it's tough to think about solving it with like a small grant here and a small grant there. I mean, what we really, organizations need, like VLT could be doing a lot more projects if we had another staff person or half-time staff person. It's one of the reasons that we haven't, done as many as I would like to be doing. It's just like a raw, like if I had someone who was just on projects, like we could be really just cranking them out. But we need some assurance that that's going to be, there's some longevity to that. So if there's some way to have capacity that could be over 5 years, like, could it be $30,000 a year for 5 years? Like that would make a meaningful contribution to like us funding a part-time position or a full-time position. And that's what we need for actually getting stuff done. Yeah, I'm seeing some thumbs up and things like that. Yeah, like, and as we all know, these projects take a while. So, having to rely on like these smaller grants, it just doesn't work. So fully support the capacity piece, but also understanding the nature of the time, the extended time that you need that capacity for, and the assurance that you're going to have it. I'll stop there.
Kent, do you have a reaction to that or a different item? You're muted, Kent.
I know now. No, I want to continue this conversation. I think it's incredible that we've been working for almost 2 years, and now we're being allowed 7 minutes to give feedback. And if and I feel that Northwest is listening to us, and I've got really good direct communication here with the quiz provider that I'm working with. But I think that, for this, the oversight that we're getting, and to have this process go on almost 2 years, and then say, okay, we'd like 7 minutes of feedback about what's going on here. And I've got a lot more than 7 minutes. And why weren't we asked at the 3-month process? And why haven't the ones that have organized this, that are overseeing the rules, overseeing the grant formulations, the targets that we're working at, why aren't they at our meetings? Why aren't they right here at our meetings and seeing what the watershed groups, what the municipalities, what the people that are applying for grants, why aren't they here watching and seeing and learning from our experiences as they're going on? I'm not going to go Friday. I'm sorry. I'm getting over an EM plan. I'm doing real well. I'm not going to spend 2.5 hours on the road and then sitting around for 6 hours and have a setback on my surgery. To me, it's not going to pan out. So I'm not going to be there. But I feel that they need this direct feedback. I'll tell you what I'm going to be doing Friday, and it's going to be fundraising. We're working, we're increasing our staff. We've got a great staff, but we're going to get a lot of good work done here. And but that's where my energies need to go now, are into fundraising. And that's going to be better use of my day on Friday than maybe giving a minute or two of feedback. So Sorry, I don't mean to sound like a grumpy old man, but you know, that's just kind of what builds up after a couple of years of the process.
I was just going to try to build on some of the things that have been said. Right now, a constraint that we operate under is that if we, there's a pot of money, and I can put on the screen if refreshing people's memories about the money is helpful, but there's a pot of money to do project work, and that money cannot be spent without the vote of the council. So if a vote of the council is required, or if it's all that's required, we could help address the capacity issue. But the problem is that the model that we work with is based on projects. And that's where it gets tricky, because as people have said, you don't build a staff around just individual projects. You need to have something that is more predictable. And I had said earlier on that, you know, should we be focusing, or could we be focusing on assessments if there was a lot of money available for assessment, and assessment is a project that you could actually show the WIC and say, vote on this assessment project, then we could maybe clear one of the hurdles. It's just, can we do it year after year? I mean, I don't know that we could. I don't know that the QUIS would be comfortable, or the book necessarily would be comfortable, if it said, okay, our plan is to, let's just call them stormwater master plan projects for regions, parts of the region or of the basin, and they're going to cost $30,000 each, and we're going to do them every year. So let's just use, just to do the math, if there were 3 organizations and we said we're putting out a request for proposals, the call for applications might be slightly different. We would say, we want your proposals to do a stormwater assessment, and we would, well, let me just step back. 3 organizations, $30,000 each. That's going to mean going to the council first and saying, okay, this year, from this year's project funds, we want to spend $90,000. Is that going to be something we could do next year and the year after? And will the results of that $30,000 assessment going to pay off down the road? We would like to think that it does, but we don't know. I mean, all of this is a risk. And I think part of the reason why DEC breaks projects up into so many steps is because they are trying to minimize risk. The thing is that the implication of trying to minimize risk is that you can't attract funding to it because it's not big enough, or it's not enough. So anyway, I'm just stepping back to say, one direction, you know, in the future that we might go to is that we would come to the Basin Council and say, okay, does it make sense to say to the council, does it make sense for the councils to say to the QUISP, invest $90,000 in assessment and then do a selection, and we are going to choose 3 organizations and they will each get $30,000. I mean, that might work, but it's kind of nebulous, and it's also not necessarily gonna, you know, we don't know what it's going to yield. It's a pretty high, it's a gamble. And so what do people think about that kind of approach? Because $30,000 by itself isn't a lot, but maybe if it was tied to $15,000 that organizations will likely get from WOV, does that start to make a meaningful difference? Is it enough to build a staff around?
Do I still have the floor? Can I follow up with a question? When the target grant formulation, when that was made 2 years ago, they started out, they were only going to allocate 4%. of your budget to doing this sort of investigation. And Charlie and some of us really objected to that and said in the early years, you need to invest a lot more in project identification. I came up with 21%. I think I was just about right on with Charlie, just had very similar. Anyway, they came up with 7. Well, 7% of your $1.5 million, there's your money right there. You know, the money that you're talking about for working with watershed groups to go out and do these investigations. I tell you, it really excites my young staff to go out and do these investigations. And we're going, you know, they're going down rabbit holes looking for projects. And, you know, it's going to take a lot of time and effort because for every 10 we look at, you know, we run into bottlenecks or corrections that we're getting from DEC or the Ag Agency or wherever we want to go, you know, to get the funding for this. But it would seem to me the way that formulation was set up, that there's funding for that.
Hey, Dean. Yeah, so I've got a comment here because I think if we had a list of projects that would be eligible for this program, that would be money well spent to come up with something like that. Because we, as you know, Dean, the town of St. Albans now has a project in the Basin 5 from CCRPC that's eligible for funding. I wouldn't have even known about that if they hadn't sent Fitzgerald Environmental Associates running around identifying projects. And as soon as I knew that we had it available, bang, I'm going after that money for this project. So I think if we were to do some kind of an assessment project in these basins up here, I think it would definitely be a positive thing to work on. That's it.
And yeah, I should point out that there are projects that are like that. They're being classified as project development, and maybe the distinction between project development and identification and assessment is no longer really that important. But there is that type of work that is underway. Yeah, and so one of those projects is one that the Regional Planning Commission is working on with MRBA that's using the Functioning Floodplain Initiative tool. The Conservation District has a related project where they are using the Functioning Floodplain tool, which is called the FFI, and they're looking specifically at buffer plantings, I believe. So there are some somewhat specialized project searches that are going on. The Conservation District is also doing that type of work in the Carmi Basin. So it is happening, but it just we haven't been able to see the results of it yet. But yes, you're right. It's easier to react to something sometimes than it is to be going out and creating it, you know, from scratch. And so when the Conservation District's projects get to the point where they have a list of projects, people in different places will be able to react to it. And similarly, when the Regional Planning Commission and MRBA get their FFI project to the point where it's got some projects, people can react to it, and then they maybe will catch fire. I just wanted to, if I could, touch on the numbers that Kent mentioned. Are important numbers, and I had put together a slide because I thought that it. So can people see a table right now? Okay, so the Missisquoi Basin got I'll call it year 1 allocation of $1.9 million. That breaks down into 15% portion that is part of administration, and the project portion that is for projects. But of that project money, there is a total of 7% that doesn't carry with it the burden of a target. So it's not, I mean, I said earlier, and I probably overstated, we could spend that money and make the wrong gamble because it doesn't actually carry a phosphorus target with it. So we have basically $136,000 that's 7% of the project money that could be invested in project identification type things. As it turns out, we've already put $85,000 into that kind of activity. So the projects that I was referring to earlier come to a total cost of $85,000. So we've used 63% of what we could. And I think what I'm looking forward to is us investing the remaining 37% in projects that are going to yield more projects. But this is where the capacity issue comes in. The folks that do those kinds of projects need to have capacity to do them. And so it's a bit of a catch 22. We have 145 kilograms of phosphorus as our first year target. On paper, we have what looks like maybe will be 80 kilograms of reduction. The rest of them, they need to get to a certain point for us to know. So that's 55% of our first year target. That's somewhat heartening news, but it's also, it's not 100%. And the thing that I don't know if we've discussed enough is that our year 2 target actually went from 145 to 205. So it means more money. It means a bigger target. It means more money, but we also need the capacity to do the projects that will deliver the phosphorus credits. So what I'm saying is that if people have ideas for exploratory projects that will yield more projects, now might be a good time to be thinking about an application, because we have that money. When we get to the point of 7%, that's where we start saying, oh, we're taking dollars away that have to be there for phosphorus reduction. And this is, Kent's comment about should it be 21% really resonates with me, because I think it takes a number like 21% that doesn't carry with it a phosphorus obligation for the amounts to really matter and be something that the partner organizations could plan on. It might be enough. Now, I've used the number 3. There are more than 3 organizations that could potentially tap into it. But that may be a recommendation that DEC needs to hear, that 7% is too low when it comes to project development. It should be something more like 21%. Lindsay, I don't know if you see Alaire's hand.
Go ahead, Alaire.
Good. I guess that's great to hear, Dean, and thinking that we may kind of try to follow suit with MRBA and the district and looking at some buffer project development. I guess a question there, the other thing that can sometimes be a little bit of a hold up, and it's something I have to consider, is like the project ID creation and kind of managing that. And with a bigger restoration project, that's just part of the course. But I'm just curious with like these other 2 projects that we've funded that are like the exploration of buffers and looking at the FFI, are you guys creating a separate watershed project ID for each possible buffer, or is this like one project that includes, exploring 10 or 15? Because that, when you're exploring, like, can we plan a buffer here? Sometimes it's just a really individual projects can actually be fairly small.
It's one number.
One number for the whole thing. Okay.
One number for the study that will translate into, I mean, unless we manage to do what Ted is asking for or suggesting would be a good idea, we're seeing it go from one to many. And I guess one of the issues is that would it be possible to go from 1 to just 2 or 3 rather than 1 to 15? Because, like, you're right, managing the project, getting the watershed project ID numbers, we have found it takes way too much effort, and we have felt that the quiz should be well. Let me put it this way: someone other than one person at DEC should be able to create watershed project numbers for at least certain types of projects, because it right now is too difficult and takes too many hours of negotiation to get the watershed ID number. We have found.
Yeah. I'm finding that too. Thank you.
Any other thoughts on the experiences that people have encountered?
Just have lots of questions and thoughts today. I thought we had a good conversation a while ago about culverts and if we want to fund culvert replacements. And I think for a very good reason, we were seeing some projects that were very expensive, town culverts and things like that, that we decided to just put a pause on that project type. For me, for VLT, and I think for a lot of us, like, there's a really different situation when you're looking at like a private road culvert, forest road or a farm road, and thinking about, I'm just curious about, like, us and maybe other QUISPs too, how we're thinking about those projects. Is that something that still there's a general consensus that we want to kind of not touch that for a while, or is that being actively discussed? And if not, maybe could we discuss it? I think it's worth reopening the conversation when we're talking about those lower, just lower investment projects that can still have quite a big impact.
Yeah, one quick response if I can. I think what I am coming to with those types of projects is that the QUISP need to try, and the BWICs need to say to potential applicants, listen, we can provide you with some funding, but it's going to be a minor portion. And hopefully we can offer enough that the cost effectiveness is still good. And essentially what we would be doing is saying, here, we can maybe help you plug a small hole for a big project, and we have to be able to claim all of the phosphorus, because if we prorated the phosphorus, it would still not be worth it, just because they tend to be expensive projects with not huge phosphorus reduction. But if we just look at it as, okay, it's going to be common for that type of project, or the default for that type of project where it's only part of the funding, we say, okay, we're never going to spend more, we're never going to be able to give you more than this amount of money, but maybe that will help you. I mean, and maybe Ted can address this because he has done a bit, and I see his hand is raised, but I think Karen's hand was up first.
So of course, I wanted to talk about the Watershed Projects ID process, since I'm that DEC person. And I wanted to point out that, I do know that there are some projects that I had to go back and forth with a few of you on, especially earlier on. But I feel like recently it's happened fairly quickly that I've been able to approve. And I would like to maybe have a session, maybe with each of the BWICs, on how project IDs are provided and where there's complications, because sometimes I think the problems exist in the understanding of what the project definition is in our either phosphorus calculator, because you need to be able to calculate phosphorus reductions, or in the clean water funds. And if we're all on the same page, then that's helpful. And understanding too, how knowing that if you understand what the project should look like, then it's just going to be easier. But I don't feel like we have as many of those problems anymore, because we've been able to, we've all been educated more about what those are. So that would be my proposal, that there be time maybe in the next couple of book meetings where we could talk about how to find what a project type really is, and where phosphorus credit can be provided, so that you all have that information and don't have to depend on me as much either to figure it out.
And Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, but does watershed project IDs extend beyond any kind of QUIS, because those are also required for WOV grants and other projects that aren't related to phosphorus, correct?
Exactly. So that's the question too, is at that point in time, that's a point when I can be talking to people about expectations as well, that I can provide the watershed projects ID number, but I also want to provide information to the applicant who I know might be going to the QUISP about whether they can get phosphorus credit or not. And I think, Ted, if we did one on culvert crossings where it was like, yep, we can put it in, but just so you know. And that way, then the applicant is much more educated as to whether this is a project to continue with. So.
Yeah, I think a refresher would be really nice. Can I speak on culverts? So going through the Memphremagog AOP work group, town culverts are a spendy proposition. We're talking 30,000 minimum for a town culvert to be replaced. And that's the average, but you can find some low hanging fruit, but you really got to have that relationship with the town really solid to get those to go. So Lair, what I'm seeing is actually it's the private roads and those smaller culverts that show up on like farm access roads, driveways. Those culverts actually can tend to fall into larger projects, like some kind of floodplain restoration or a stream restoration project with like process based like BDAs. So we have a project up MWA has a project up in Valley Brook, just north of Lake Seymour. And it's in phase 2 where they're marching upstream and removing culverts and getting the stream back into shape around where those culverts would exist. So putting in either some kind of bridge or a expanded culvert. And that is funded through the Memphremagog QUISP. It's those smaller ones. And we actually have a few tools at our disposal for smaller culverts on private lands. And those are the RCPP through the NRCS, those regional. So we can actually get funding and engineering from the NRCS to get those taken care of. And there's a big bucket of money for that as well. But within the QUISP framework, it really does need to be tied to some larger restoration and they can be carried by a bigger p-value, like Dean said. Your phosphorus reduction is huge and you have all these items, you could probably squeeze in the cost for a good bit of those. It's once you hit a town culvert, all bets are off on that. Even though the potential for phosphorus exploding into your system is really high with those, currently those functioning floodplain initiatives and the calculator don't take into potential phosphorus on some of these degrading culverts, and we kind of are reactionary. So once those things blow, then we're all really concerned about it. It's the same scenario where 25% of the phosphorus coming out of the Memphremagog is from stream banks, and those are large rivers on the Black, Clyde, and Barton. I've been spending a lot of time wrapping my head around this and how to approach it from a funding point, because there are a lot of culverts out there that do need to be replaced. And the towns have a lot more mechanisms to pull on their priority culverts. They can go to VTrans, they can go through multiple sources with VTrans on that.
Thanks for that. I might reach out to hear some of your other insights about the funding, because I've been doing the same thing. So kind of great to hear that you're doing it too.
Yeah. They're not easy projects to get off the ground.
It could be
Well,
that
they're usually off the ground. That's the problem, right?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Little culvert humor.
it may be that we've reached the end of this. If there are no other thoughts on the matter. And if that's the case, then we may be moving on to our next agenda item. I'm not quite sure, Lindsay, but.
Yeah, I thought they didn't feel like sharing on screen. Just shoot an email to Dean or to me, and we can make sure to.
Okay, no, I'll pull things up momentarily.
The next agenda item is about round 5, call for projects. So, you had sent out details about that.
Yes, I am trying to get myself organized here.
Take your time. So, scrolling back up to that page. So we've got call for projects opening. Oops, I lost that page too. Oh, sorry. Did I skip over? Did I skip over talking about Friday? No, we're good. So call for projects opening on April 17th. So coming right up like the rest of the year, freight train style. Deadline will be May 22nd. And Dean, you had some potential changes, or are you seeking potential changes?
Well, yes, I was going to share that we have a slightly updated form. So overall, the call for applications will strike people as very similar. There's been a clarification or a correction to the eligible project types. With apologies, there was a link in the last one, I think, that was broken for the funding policy, but that's been corrected. The type of change that is probably most important to draw attention to is that we are really highlighting the importance of the cultural resource assessment, because that is something that has in some ways snuck up on different applicants. the cost of, well, first they need to budget for it. They need to include it in some amount, and then they need to include the right amount. But we've highlighted the importance of that on the call for projects, and as we've also done it in the online forum that we will be using. So the only other thing that I was going to say is this paragraph, how this call for project compares with earlier rounds. We are saying in this text that we would like people to, yeah, we are open to receive applications for all stages of development. I hear people when they said it would be great if there were fewer stages, but we're just trying to drive home the message that we are open to all types. We didn't have any information that told us that the WIC was feeling strongly to emphasize one or the other. Some DEC staff have made me think that it would be possible for a call for applications to just say one particular type of application if we felt that one type of application was the one that we wanted to emphasize in a given funding round. I'm not at the point where I would like us to limit what people can apply for. It's just that we want people to understand they can apply for almost anything as long as it's an eligible activity. So anyway, this is a slightly varied form, but not drastically different, and with some edits cleaned up. But that's, if there had been a realization during our earlier discussion that something very specific needed to happen in this funding round or this upcoming funding round, which is going to be published on April 17th, then I would be doing everything that I could to make that take effect. But since I don't think there was anything quite like that, then I won't make any drastic changes. So that's pretty much that.
Great. Any questions or concerns, or want to ping any ideas off of us? Okay. Next agenda item is to just touch on Friday's meeting. So if it's happening on Friday, there was an email that went out yesterday saying we're not going to cancel it due to weather. So hopefully folks can make it there.
Yeah, I know there was a registration list that was published, but could people just give me a show of hands how many folks who are on the screen right now are planning to be there? So I've got Ellen, Sarah.
I'm on the fence, Dean. I'm on the fence whether or not I'm gonna show I am registered.
I hear you. I hear you. And if the weather is gnarly, or if there's still a lot of snow, and there will be, Karen, I think you did make it known that you could meet people at the carpooling site in Richmond or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I've got my husband's CRV with studded snow tires. So, and I can also meet at the Milton, the park and ride up in Milton too, because I'm right off that road on Clay Point. So, email me at karen.bates@vermont.gov if you're at all interested.
So if you think carpooling is in your future, let Karen know. And just for the chair and vice chair, I will be sending you an email. I have to, if there are going to be slides shared during the SLAM portion, we've been asked to have them submitted by the end of the day. So if I'm going to go in that direction, I will circulate something to you just to say heads up, this is where the slides look like they're going. It is, I understand, a fairly sizable room, and the last I'd heard is that the display was a TV, although maybe now there's a screen. And one of the concerns I had is whether or not the room was so big and the screen was not so large that it wouldn't really make that much point. And I know some of the other QUISPs are not planning to use slides. So I'm not 100% committed to using slides. And so that may be something I'd be interested in the chair and the vice chair providing feedback on, because I think nothing would be more frustrating than having slides in a large room that many people can't see. So may not go there. That was that. And we have, as far as updates, or sometimes under updates and conclusions, we talk about possible future agenda items. And I do have a note that I've made about possible or requested future agenda item having to do with discussing or going over, reviewing the process of creating project IDs. There was one other informational topic, if we are, I've just kind of barreled into that, Lindsay, and if that's okay. Okay. I just wanted to draw people's attention to one relatively new addition to our website. As some of you may remember, the Regional Planning Commission, as QUISP, has gone through a pre-qualification process, both for the partner organizations, so that it's easy to move forward with projects if you've submitted an application. But we've also gone through a process with contractors and consultants, and the website has this table in it. This is the first of two tables. It's the list of consultants who have been pre-qualified. It's focusing on what I'm calling the design firms, but you can see where they've been pre-qualified in the type of work. And then, so it's a fairly long list, but if you click the plus, there are also some details, and including the contact person, phone numbers, and things like that. So some of you who may be contemplating projects, or you've gotten a project funded and you want information on what possible firms you might use, just remember that there is this resource. The next table that's going to be put up is going to be a shorter list of the what some people like to call the people with machines, or the big yellow machines, and it will be a listing, similar listing for the contractors. But just didn't think that I had mentioned this in an email blast. Wanted people to know that there are these firms, and because cultural resources have become a topic of a fair bit of discussion recently, just wanted people to know that this list does include firms that do cultural resource assessment. And that should have been highlighted, but now I'm not seeing it. So I have to apologize, because that was supposed to be a separate column. So I'm going to get that fixed.
Dean, do you have a web link to this available somewhere, or is it in?
Yes, it is. I'm sorry, I'm going to drop it in the chat. And it is on what we call the procurement page. And so people should be able to, and it's down at the bottom. Oh, I'm sorry, they have got the, okay, so since I last checked, the contractors listing is now added. It wasn't when I checked last. And that was it.
Right. Thanks, everybody, for participating in the discussion, and thanks, Dean, for running through all the information. If anyone has any closing thoughts or last minute concerns they want to express, is there a chance? And if not, I'll seek a motion to close out the meeting.
But before you do that, sorry, just as a reminder, there is that the next agenda will include scoring of projects because we timed things so that applications will come in and we'll pull them together and you will be doing a ranking. So just that if you have an application idea in mind, get it ready. And if you're getting ready to review, you will have that at your next agenda.
Thanks. Ted, did you have something you were gonna
Yeah,
say?
still trying to navigate to that website that Dean showed us. Halfway there.
Okay. We can send that out by email to you if folks are having a hard time finding it. Okay, someone want a motion to close out?
Move to close.
Motion from Alaire, is there a second?
Second.
Second from Ted. All in favor? Raise a hand. Got Lindsay, Dan, Sarah, Ted, Alaire, Barry, and Beth, and Kent. Great. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you all, and hunker down and stay safe.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.